He smiled, his eyes twinkling in the moonlight. I saw you standing here and thought you could use some company. Mind if I pour you a glass? Emily hesitated for a moment before nodding. Jack poured her a glass of wine and handed it to her, their fingers brushing briefly. She felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. As they sipped their wine, Jack began to talk. He spoke about his own struggles in his marriage, how he felt trapped and unfulfilled. Emily listened, feeling a kinship with him that she had never felt with David. As the night wore on, the conversation grew more intimate. They spoke about their hopes and dreams, their fears and regrets. Emily found herself opening up to Jack in a way she never had with David. And then, in a moment of weakness, she leaned in and kissed him. It was soft and tentative at first, but then it deepened, becoming more passionate and urgent. Jack pulled away, his eyes filled with desire. Emily, But before he could finish, the balcony door swung open, and David stood there, his eyes wide with shock and betrayal. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his voice filled with anger and hurt. Emily felt her heart sink as she realized the magnitude of what she had done. She looked at David, searching for the words to explain, but he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, alone with Jack. "Emily, Jack began again, but she cut him off, her mind racing with guilt and regret. "We can't do this, Jack," she said, her voice trembling. "What we're doing, it's wrong. I can't betray David like this." Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with longing. "I know, Emily. I know it's wrong, but I can't help how I feel about you. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Emily felt a tear slide down her cheek. "I'm sorry, Jack. I'm so sorry." And with that, she turned and fled back into the house, leaving Jack standing alone on the balcony, the weight of their betrayal heavy on his shoulders. As Emily lay in bed that night, the events of the evening replayed in her mind. She knew that what she had done was unforgivable, that she had betrayed the man she had once loved more than anything in the world. But she also knew that she couldn't deny the feelings she had for Jack, feelings that had lain dormant for so long. And so, as she drifted off to sleep, she was left to wonder what the future held for her, for David, and for Jack.
The next morning, Emily awoke to find David already gone. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the events of the previous night weighing heavily on her mind. She knew she had to talk to David, to explain, to beg for his forgiveness. But she also knew that there was no excuse for what she had done. As she got out of bed and made her way downstairs, she found David in the kitchen, sitting at the table, his back to her. He didn't turn around as she entered the room, but she could feel the tension radiating off him. "David, please," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." He turned to her then, his eyes cold and distant. "What is there to talk about, Emily?" he said, his voice flat. "You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. "I know, David. I know what I did was wrong. I was lost, confused. I felt neglected, unloved. But that's no excuse for what I did." David stood up then, his eyes blazing with anger. "No excuse. You're damn right there's no excuse. How could you do this to me, to us? How could you throw away everything we had for what? A fling with my brother?" Emily felt the tears welling up in her eyes. "It wasn't just a fling, David. I have feelings for Jack. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but I can't deny how I feel." David shook his head, his expression one of disbelief. "Feelings for Jack? How long has this been going on, Emily? How long have you been lying to me, pretending that everything was okay?" Emily felt a pang of guilt. "It's been going on for a few months," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I know I should have told you sooner, but I was scared. Scared of losing you, of losing everything we had. David's expression softened slightly, but his eyes were still filled with hurt and betrayal. I don't know what to say, Emily. I never thought you could do something like this to me. To us. Emily took a step towards him, reaching out a hand. David, please. I know I messed up, big time. But I love you. I always have, and I always will. Can't we try to work through this? Can't we try to rebuild what we once had? David looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of deceit. After a long moment, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. I don't know, Emily. I need time to think, to process all of this. I can't just forgive you overnight. Emily nodded, her heart breaking. I understand, David. I'll give you all the time you need. Just know that I'm here, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. With that, she turned and left the kitchen, leaving David alone with his thoughts. As she made her way back upstairs, she couldn't help but wonder what the future held for her and David, whether their marriage could survive the betrayal that had torn them apart.
Days turned into weeks, and Emily and David's relationship remained strained. David was distant, withdrawn, and Emily felt like she was walking on eggshells around him. She knew that rebuilding their marriage would take time, but she was willing to do whatever it took. One evening, as Emily was preparing dinner, there was a knock at the door. She opened it to find Jack standing on the doorstep, looking nervous and agitated. "Jack, what are you doing here?" Emily asked, surprised to see him. "I need to talk to you, Emily," Jack said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "It's about David." Emily felt a sense of dread wash over her. "What about David? Is everything okay?" Jack shook his head, his expression grave. "No, Emily, everything is not okay. I did something terrible, and I need to tell you before David finds out from someone else." Emily felt her heart start to race. "What did you do, Jack? What's going on?" Jack took a deep breath, steeling himself. "I told David about us, about our affair." Emily felt the color drain from her face. "You what? Why would you do that, Jack? You promised me you wouldn't say anything." Jack looked down, unable to meet her gaze. "I know, Emily, and I'm sorry. I just couldn't live with the guilt anymore. I had to tell him the truth." Emily felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "You had no right, Jack. You had no right to interfere in my marriage like that." "I know, Emily, and I'm sorry," Jack said, his voice pleading. "I know I messed up, big time, but I couldn't stand seeing David like that, not knowing the truth. I had to come clean." Emily shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "You've ruined everything, Jack. You've ruined my marriage, my life." Jack reached out a hand, but Emily pulled away. "Emily, please, I know you're angry, but I had to tell him. It was eating me up inside, knowing what I had done to him, to you." Emily wiped away her tears, her anger turning to resignation. "I don't know what to do, Jack. I love David, but I also have feelings for you. How can I choose between you two?" Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I don't expect you to choose, Emily. I know I've messed everything up, but I just couldn't keep lying to him, to you. I had to tell the truth, no matter the consequences." And with that, Jack turned and left, leaving Emily standing alone in the kitchen, the weight of his words heavy on her heart. She knew that things would never be the same again, that the revelation of their affair would have far-reaching consequences for them all.
The revelation of Emily and Jack's affair rocked David to his core. He felt like his world was crumbling around him, like everything he had believed in was a lie. He couldn't understand how Emily could betray him like that, how she could throw away everything they had built together for a fleeting moment of passion. As days turned into weeks, David struggled to come to terms with what had happened. He and Emily had tried to talk, to work through their issues, but the trust that had once been the foundation of their marriage was shattered beyond repair. One evening, as David sat alone in the living room, lost in his thoughts, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find Jack standing on the doorstep, a look of remorse on his face. "David, can we talk?" Jack asked, his voice filled with sadness. David hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let Jack in. They sat down in the living room, facing each other in awkward silence. "I'm sorry, David," Jack began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, to Emily. I never meant for any of this to happen." David looked at him, his eyes filled with pain. "Why, Jack? Why did you do it? Why did you betray me like that?" Jack looked down, unable to meet David's gaze. "I don't know, David. I was lost, confused. I felt trapped in my own marriage, and when Emily reached out to me, I couldn't resist. I know that's no excuse, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Jack. I don't know if I can ever forgive either of you for what you did. You both betrayed me in the worst possible way." Jack nodded, his eyes filled with tears. "I understand, David. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to apologize, to try to make things right, if that's even possible." As Jack got up to leave, David spoke up, his voice filled with resignation. "Jack, wait. I don't know what the future holds for any of us, but I do know that I need some time to think, to process everything that's happened. I hope you can understand." Jack nodded, his expression one of acceptance. "I understand, David. Take all the time you need. And again, I'm sorry." With that, Jack left, leaving David alone with his thoughts. He knew that rebuilding his life would be a long and difficult process, but he was determined to move forward, to find a way to heal from the wounds that had been inflicted upon him.
Weeks turned into months, and David found himself still struggling to come to terms with what had happened. He and Emily had decided to separate, to take some time apart to figure out what they wanted out of life. David had moved out of their home and into a small apartment on the other side of town, trying to create a new life for himself. One evening, as David was walking home from work, he received a text message from Emily. It simply said, "Can we talk?" David hesitated for a moment before replying, "Sure." "When and where?" They agreed to meet at a nearby cafe, and when David arrived, he found Emily sitting at a table in the corner, looking nervous and apprehensive. "David, thank you for meeting me," Emily said, her voice wavering. David sat down across from her, studying her face. She looked tired, worn down by the events of the past few months. "What did you want to talk about, Emily?" David asked, his tone neutral. Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I wanted to apologize, David. I wanted to apologize for what I did, for betraying you the way I did. I know I hurt you deeply, and I'm so sorry." David felt a surge of anger and hurt. "Apologizing now, after everything that's happened? After you tore our marriage apart?" Emily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know I can't change the past, David. I know I can't undo what I did. But I want you to know that I'm truly sorry. I never meant to hurt you, to destroy our life together." David felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything that had happened, he still loved Emily. He still hoped that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward. "Emily, I don't know what to say," David said, his voice breaking. "I still love you, Emily. I always have, and I always will. But I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Emily reached out a hand, but David pulled away. "I understand, David. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I hope that maybe, with time, we can find a way to move forward, to rebuild what we once had." David looked at her, his heart heavy with pain. "I don't know, Emily. I just don't know." And with that, he got up and left the cafe, leaving Emily sitting there alone, her heart breaking. She knew that rebuilding her marriage would be a long and difficult process, but she was determined to try, to do whatever it took to make things right again.
As the weeks passed, David and Emily continued to navigate the aftermath of their shattered marriage. David had agreed to meet with Emily regularly to talk, to try to find a way forward. Despite his lingering feelings of hurt and betrayal, he couldn't deny that he still loved her, that he still wanted to find a way to make things right. One evening, as they sat in a park, watching the sun set, Emily spoke up, her voice hesitant. "David, I've been thinking a lot about us, about our marriage. And I think we can still make it work. I think we can still find a way to be happy together." David looked at her, surprise and hope flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean, Emily? How can we possibly make things work after everything that's happened?" Emily took a deep breath, steeling herself. "I've been seeing a therapist, David. I've been trying to work through my feelings, to understand why I did what I did. And I think I've finally come to terms with it. I think I'm ready to move forward, to rebuild our life together." David felt a glimmer of hope. Could it be possible? Could they really find a way to move past the pain and betrayal? I don't know what to say, Emily," David said, his voice filled with emotion. "I want to believe you, to believe that we can still find happiness together. But it's going to take time, Emily. It's going to take a lot of time and effort to rebuild the trust that was lost." Emily nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand, David. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right. I love you, David. I always have, and I always will." David looked at her, his heart heavy with emotion. "I love you too, Emily. I always have, and I always will. Let's take this one day at a time, okay? Let's see where this road takes us."